Tensions along the Ukrainian-Russian border are continuing to mount as the U.S. warns Russia has added an additional 7,000 troops to the region. Now, this news comes despite the Kremlin declaring its forces are pulling back from the border. According to Western estimates, more than 150,000 Russian troops have surrounded Ukraine to the east, north, and south of the country. The Wall Street Journal reports Russian-backed separatists and authorities of Kyiv are exchanging accusation over ceasefire violations on the front line. Things are getting spicy. Joining me now to break this all down is California Congressman Bera. And Congressman, the West warns that Russia has added more troops, as I mentioned, while Russia maintains it has reduced the number of troops. So why is there discrepancy?
You know, when I was in Ukraine a couple of weeks ago and we were talking with the Ukrainian leadership, with President Zelensky, they said we ought to approach Vladimir Putin as though he was a poker player. So this could be one of those head fakes where he's saying one thing and doing another thing. And I think we've not been briefed on any evidence of troop withdrawals. And in fact, the administration and intelligence community have said the exact opposite. The other thing that has us worried is, you know, this escalating tension rhetoric between Ukrainian forces in the Donbas region and Russian separatists. That's exactly the type of thing that Vladimir Putin would use as an excuse to go in and, you know, at least move troops into the Donbas region. So I think we're still on pretty heightened alert right now.
Now, we've been talking about diplomacy. There's always room for diplomacy. There's still room for diplomacy. But adding troops to the border, does that make that the whole diplomacy word kind of just fade away?
You know, diplomacy is still always an option. I think Mr. Putin was surprised at how strong the Biden administration reacted, how strongly all of the European Union came together, along with the United States. And you've even seen other democracies around the world, like Japan and others, come together and really stand up to this autocrat in Russia. And I think that surprised him. I thought he probably felt he could divide us, and the exact opposites happened.
Now, you met recently with the Ukrainian president. Could you tell us how that went?
You know, we did. We met with President Zelensky, his foreign minister, his defense minister. You know, it was a good meeting. And again, I recognize that, you know, he's being cautious. He doesn't want to create panic in his country. He doesn't want to further negatively impact the economy of Ukraine, which has been impacted by this. That said, they're very matter of fact. They're preparing to defend their country. You know, when you talk to just regular Ukrainians, you know, they're signing up for the military. They know they can't defeat the Russian army, but what they can do is fight an insurgency, and they have no intention of going back under Russian rule. They've tasted freedom. You know, it's our obligation as the world's oldest democracy to stand with this young democracy in Ukraine.
Speaking of our obligation, how do you think the U.S. administration has been dealing with this crisis overall?
You know, I actually think the Biden administration has been very strong in its response. Again, rallying the European Union, rallying NATO, taking very decisive moves and moving some of our troops that are already stationed in Europe to shore up the countries that are closer to Ukraine, but also getting further obligations. So if Russia's whole goal was to force NATO to withdraw from Eastern Europe, he's accomplished the exact opposite. I also think, you know, the sanctions package that we've been briefed on and that, you know, they've also alluded to would be devastating to the Russian economy. Again, we'll see if Mr. Putin's bluffing, if, you know, he decides to fold his hand or at least walk back where he's at. But he's strengthened us and strengthened our resolve.
Now, when it comes to the invasion, does it seem imminent, or do you think that there is still time to kind of talk it over and get these troops back home and Ukraine and the rest of the world feeling better? Or do you think that is just that window is just getting smaller and smaller and smaller?
You know, I think there's time to hold off an invasion of troops. Now, do I think we'll continue to see actions like the cyber attacks that are already taking place on Ukraine? That probably continues. Mm-hmm. You know, we probably have to work with the Ukrainians to think about what a proportional response is should these continue to escalate. But I don't think there's any going back at this point. You know, we're continuing to fortify and help Ukraine with its own ability to defend itself. And we've seen the threat to other NATO allies in Eastern Europe and the Balkan countries. I think we will continue to work with them to fortify their defenses as well.
Is there any situation where all sides win? And what would that situation look like?
Yeah, I think the situation where all sides win is, if we, reassure Russia on some of its security concerns. When Russia talks about Ukraine joining NATO, President Biden's been very clear that there's no attempt for, any imminent joining of NATO, but that's ultimately up to the NATO nations in Ukraine. And, President Zelensky said, maybe that's off the table. So, Russia could walk away and say, okay, we got to win. Ukraine's not joining NATO. I think we could get a win by saying, okay, how do we de-escalate tensions? And then, Russia wants to reduce the nuclear threat in Europe. Well, that's a bilateral negotiation where Russia also has to reduce its nuclear weapons. That would probably be a good thing.
Congressman Bera, you've been incredibly wise. Thank you so much for taking the time and joining us on their show and shedding some light on this issue. Sir, I appreciate your time. Thank you again.